Hello, welcome to Cafe DC. I'm Faiz Rahman, and our guest today is Mr. Andrew Small. He's a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, an interesting organization. We'll just first ask about the fund, the organization itself, and then today we're going to talk to him about China-Pakistan relations and also the United States' role in the region. He's an expert in these areas. So, Mr. Small, thank you very much. Can I just call you Andrew?
Yes, of course.
Okay, good. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate your time this morning with all this traffic in the DC area. I appreciate you coming here to our studios. Yes, let's talk about your organization first. It's a very unique name, the German Marshall Fund of the United States. A lot of people haven't heard about this, even in this town. What is it about?
So the German Marshall Fund is an independent American foundation, was created in 1972 as the result of a gift from the German government to the US government as kind of a thank you for the Marshall Plan. The gift was given with one sole objective, which was to promote transatlantic relations. Over the history of the fund, then since the 70s, for a long time it was essentially a funding organization for other entities. It funded a lot of the other
reconstruction and rebuilding of.
Well, it's been a mix. It funded a lot of the Western think tanks in Western Europe and working on US policy. Funded a lot of the US entities around here in town. Brookings, Peterson Institute was founded by a grant from GMF. A number of the other think tanks in town have had a lot of funding in the past, but it's kind of evolved with the history of the transatlantic relationship. So it was doing a lot of work in the Balkans, including with civil society. Before that, there was the fall of the wall. It was doing a lot of work in Central and Eastern Europe. It moved on to the Black Sea region, Georgia, Ukraine, some of these parts. And now, and the reason that I came to the fund is that the transatlantic relationship is increasingly global in scope, and both the US and Europe are having to adjust in particular to the rise of China. So nowadays, the scope of our work goes well beyond Europe.
It's interesting that, a transatlantic fund, I mean, people would think it would focus on Europe and America, North America at the most, but they have an expert who's focusing on Pakistan-China relationship. And that's the purpose of our interview today, that we need to talk about what do you think is going on between these two countries and in the region. As you know, Pakistan and China can be, more apart in terms of heritage, language, culture, religions, food. There are lots of differences, but at the same time, the two countries seem to be very close in terms of their strategic partnerships, their goals in the region, and probably their alliances and even trade. So what do you think is the reason for this very unique and interesting relationship between China and Pakistan?
Historically, the short answer to it is India. Originally in the 50s, of course, Pakistan was just a US ally, member of alliances that were specifically directed against China. So the early years of the relationship were not close at all. It's after China's war with India in 62, Pakistan's war with India in 65 in particular, that the two sides came together around the advantages that could be achieved from coordinating when it came to their shared antagonist. And so those were the early years of the relationship that were really founded around a common strategic opponent. But because of that shared strategic opponent, the two were able to build a level of trust that is actually quite rare, I think, for either of the two countries. The two sides have never been a formal alliance, but in practice, the level of cooperation between them on strategic and military affairs has gone closer even than some alliances. In particular, China's support to Pakistan's nuclear program in the 80s was absolutely crucial to the development of both the nuclear program itself and the missile program. And the level of trust that there needs to be to cooperate on an area of such sensitivity as that, I think has built out the relationship to go well beyond India and well beyond military issues. As we've just seen in the last year, Pakistan, and in particular this new China-Pakistan economic corridor, is going to be part of China's major efforts to transform its entire agenda in its western periphery and across Eurasia. It's going to be the connection point between its Silk Road economic belt across Central Asia and its maritime Silk Road that leads through the Indian Ocean. So Pakistan is going to play, and it has played a major bridging role for China in the past. Of course, Pakistan was responsible for the secret messaging and the secret visit that Kissinger played for the opening of US-China relations. It's played a similar role with Saudi Arabia for China. It's always been an important bridge for China, again, because of this strategic trust that's been built between the two sides. But it's rare for China. I would say it's the closest friend that China has in its international relations. And China doesn't have many friends and allies in that sense. So when it comes to which countries China can trust as it wants to become a global power, for instance, where can China trust to have an overseas naval facility that it can rely on? Pakistan is one of the only places that it can turn. So as China starts to look beyond just South Asia to the Middle East, to its global power projection capabilities, actually having a friend that it can count on matters more. And for Pakistan, these huge economic investments that have been promised from China have a potentially, now have a potentially transformative effect.
Andrew, yes, in your short answer, you said the short answer was India. I mean, that's the common denominator, so to speak, in this relationship. But yes, we understand that yes, Pakistan is wary of its borders with India. They feel threatened by so many things from that side. But what's in it for China when it comes to India? Don't you think India being such a big country and China also, slightly bigger than that, China wants to have a good relationship with that country as well, and it should not be a zero-sum case for the Chinese. And how do they balance it?
Well, particularly since the late 80s, since the China-India relationship started significantly improving, there has been an effort of sorts to balance between the two sides. China at least hasn't wanted its close relationship with Pakistan to create too many difficulties for the relationship with India. It does nonetheless, of course, and there's still advantages even now to having Indian troops tied down on its western borders with Pakistan, when China, of course, still has its unresolved border dispute with India, one of the only really the only major unresolved land border dispute that China has. And China and India are of course operating as strategic competitors across a whole series of areas as well. But the sense from China is that you should be able to operate as strategic competitors but still develop a cooperative relationship on areas where you see eye to eye. And I think we've seen that on various global issues between China and India, particularly on, say, climate and trade. But in the region, this is a booming economic relationship. The bilateral economic relationship is far larger.
India and China.
For both India, for India and China, it's a much larger economic relationship than the one that China has, say, with Pakistan. It vastly outstrips it. And so for China, it wants to be able to ensure that it can maintain and develop some of these cooperative elements of the relationship, even while some of these areas of strategic competition, which include the relationship with Pakistan and the role that Pakistan plays for China vis-a-vis India in essentially being able to tie India down to a certain extent in its neighborhood, it still wants to be able to maintain that. And it's not deviated from some important elements of its relationship with Pakistan for India's sake. It's still been willing to make all of these important military transfers, even to provide some protection to Pakistan when it comes to issues of, for instance, Lashkar-e-Taiba, the UN Security Council, even on some quite sensitive areas like that.
Andrew, you mentioned latest investments promised investments in Pakistan, $45 to $46 billion worth, and this economic corridor that the Chinese are planning to build. The Indians have had officially, they released a statement saying that they have serious reservations on this corridor. Why would India be so concerned with something which is so economically beneficial, not just for Pakistan, but also for the region, for the entire region?
There's two or three reasons. The main one is the fact that it runs through contested territory in Kashmir. India has always protested about any Chinese economic activity in Kashmir on the Pakistani side, and so as a matter of course they will always formally protest these activities. The second element to an extent is that among the port facilities that will be developed under the auspices of the corridor, Gwadar port and even just the development of the military aspects of Pakistani port facilities full stop have the potential to impact on the bilateral India-Pakistan relationship. They are, from Pakistan's perspective, and partly directed at ensuring that India can't blockade Pakistan as it did in previous wars. So they want ports further away from Karachi that can give them further strategic depth. So India is sensitive about some of those military elements. And there's the nuclear cooperation. It's only on the civil nuclear side between China and Pakistan when it comes to the economic corridor type projects. Sometimes they don't even count the nuclear cooperation under the auspices of the corridor. But India is still sensitive about that, because even though it's civil nuclear cooperation, I think the sense is still that military nuclear cooperation is easier to move forward when it's taking place under the framework of under a broader framework of civil nuclear cooperation as well. But really, the chief point of sensitivity around the whole project is Kashmir.
So Pakistan, of course, has rejected outrightly on all these these reservations. The Chinese response has been a little subdued. What do you think the Chinese would do in the face of these objections and these reservations?
These objections will not make a meaningful difference to China. China's actually become more comfortable about moving ahead with economic projects in Kashmir, in Pakistan, than it was in the past. It's shifted previously, both with some of the port developments. It was concerned about India's reaction. Kashmir, it was concerned about India's reaction. Now I think it's just prepared to press ahead despite the Indian objections. The concern that China does actually have on India's part is the China-Pakistan economic corridor is part of a much bigger scheme, this one road, one belt, the Silk Road economic belt and maritime Silk Road. China would like India to become a part of this entire scheme. Some of the projects that it's developing fall under the framework of this entire scheme, and because of India's objections to the economic corridor, it's made it more hesitant about joining up with some of these initiatives. So China would still like to overcome those obstacles with India, and I think the sense is still, for the sake of the level of investments that might be in play for India too, that it probably will be able to overcome some of the sort of semantic details of what you actually call these projects and what the whole scheme is called.
So some of these foreseeable economic benefits can allay those fears, the Indian fears of this military activity, or
although India has formally protested about the China-Pakistan economic corridor, it does also see some potential advantages within Pakistan. Of course, it's not just an economic initiative. From China's perspective, it's also intended to help stabilize Pakistan more broadly. The sense is that helping to stabilize Pakistan's economy and giving this huge injection of investment will help to deal with some of the security challenges that Pakistan is facing inside the country as well. And even that it will act as something of a restraining force in the region. It creates a new set of incentives for actors in Pakistan, even in Afghanistan as well, which China is looking to, in addition to Pakistan, to trade perhaps some of their security goals for some really large economic benefits. And I think the other element on the economic side is, from some on the Indian side see it as potential almost normalization of Pakistan's civil and economic life. The more power that's given to Pakistani business, normal Pakistani politics rather than just military-dominated politics, the more likely some would see the hope is of being able to stabilize and normalize and have these kind of restraining and balancing factors in the India-Pakistan relationship over time as well. So although they're formally objecting, I think they see some advantages that might accrue as well.
They'll create a whole new set of questions, but we have to take a short break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk to you about the US role in the region in this backdrop. Please stay with us, don't go away. It's a very interesting discussion with Andrew Small, the Transatlantic Fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States of America. Thank you.
Pakistan is not entirely comfortable with the degree to which US-India ties have been deepening. It's been a kind of a parallel set of tracks in a certain sense, but the importance of the US-Pakistan relationship for a while did put certain constraints on the US-India relationship.
Welcome back. I'm Faiz Rahman and you're watching Cafe DC. Our guest today is Mr. Andrew Small, a senior transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thank you very much once again, Andrew. So we were talking about China, Pakistan, and India. Again, this economic corridor that been discussed threadbare in the not just in the regional but the international press. Let's talk about the U.S. role in the region. There's a perception, not just in the region, but even here in D.C., and it's been discussed in some think tank papers and reports, that U.S. seems to be kind of withdrawing from the region, especially in the aftermath of this, the end of this Afghan war. What do you think?
It depends what you mean by the region.
Mm-hmm.
Afghanistan, certainly. I mean, the facts on the ground are a major drawdown of the US presence, and that has direct implications for Pakistan as well, which was the main transit route for a lot of the goods and things that were going into Afghanistan. So in terms of the felt presence in Afghanistan and Pakistan, clearly there's a level of withdrawal of US presence, and that translates politically as well. There's less attention being paid now to Afghanistan and to Pakistan than there was when Afghanistan was the central conflict that the US was undertaking. But if you look at India, for instance, actually the US-India relationship is deepening, is moving forward in some quite important ways, but also directed towards East Asia as well. It's partly about the bilateral relationship.
Excuse me. Is this the strengthening of relationship between India and the United States is at the expense of some other countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, or others in the region?
Of course. I mean, Pakistan is not entirely comfortable with the degree to which US-India ties have been deepening. It's been a kind of a parallel set of tracks in a certain sense, but the importance of the US-Pakistan relationship for a while did put certain constraints on the US-India relationship implicitly, if not in terms of the actual content of the cooperation. And to a certain extent now, as we've seen we saw with yet another Obama visit to India, not happened with Pakistan. The importance of that bilateral relationship with India is now far greater than it was, but it's being cited not just about India's role in South Asia. It's being looked at in the total picture of the broader Indo-Pacific, and so in that sense, the US relationship with India when it comes to joint exercises in the region, where India conducts more joint exercises with the US than it does with any other country. It's not as clear that the US interest in some of the key countries in the region is diminishing. It's just that it's being rebalanced, and of course for Afghanistan, if the situation takes a seriously problematic turn, there's always the danger that the US will be sucked back in. But if anything, the drawdown of US presence has so far positively affected the US-Pakistan relationship. I think the level of strain that there'd been in recent years on the relationship has come down significantly. Actually, the two sides are on much better terms than they were a few years ago. So it's not necessarily the case that the reduction in US presence is necessarily having a damaging effect, say, on the US-Pakistan relationship.
Another sticking point when you listen to these comments in the Pakistani press, that US seems to have given some tacit support to the Indian desire of becoming a permanent member of the Security Council at the United Nations. Do you think it's going to happen, and do you really believe that the Chinese would let it pass, and even the other international powers would see it favorably?
No, it's very hard to imagine. You'd have to have a huge transformation in the China-India relationship for them to be willing to give them this. In that sense, it means that it's possible for the US and for some other countries to have the symbolism of supporting India's bid without necessarily having to go through the practice of it actually taking place. I don't think UN Security Council reform agenda is really moving forward very quickly at the moment. I don't think there's any really tangible sense of progress.
When you look at China, China is not just confined to that region, as we discussed before. It's been very active in Africa, very active in the Middle East, and also obviously Afghanistan. So what's the end game? I mean, it will be a little bit too early for us to discuss the end game of this nature. I mean, of their kind of advancements in those regions. But what do they have in mind? Why they are so interested in Africa and in the Middle East and other areas?
So when it comes to China's role in a number of parts of the developing world, China's tried to expand it in ways where the level of political sensitivities will not be too great. Africa was one of the areas that it could move fastest in, precisely because it didn't have the level of political sensitivity with the United States.
Unlike South China Sea.
And yes. So the interesting thing about the US drawdown in Afghanistan and all of the implications that follow from it, because it means less interest in Central Asia, it means less interest in Pakistan, and you can even see some elements of a drawdown of presence, of course, in Iraq as well. I mean, presence on the ground in the Middle East, if not a drawdown in the level of political attention that the region gets. But the sense that China has in this part of the world is this is an area where it can expand, conduct some of these ambitious infrastructure schemes without running into political resistance. When you look at the Asia-Pacific region, when you look to China's east, there's huge tensions with the United States in this part of the world. When you look across Central Asia, South Asia, even towards the Middle East, certainly Africa, these are areas where in some respects, on the US part, an expanded Chinese economic role, if it helps to bring stability to the region, is seen in relatively beneficial terms. So these are areas where, while US attention is elsewhere, China can grow its role with some high level of support from some of the countries in the region, and effectively the tacit, or in some cases active consent of the US as well. What this looks like in 10, 15, 20 years' time for US interests is a different question, but in the near term, at least, I think this is being seen as a relatively constructive area of a kind of more assertive Chinese role, politically even as well in, say, Afghanistan. Whereas in East Asia, Chinese assertiveness is obviously seen as a major problem.
Well, Andrew, so one question which is on everybody's mind, at least in the region, that would the Chinese surpass the United States as a greater superpower, not just in the region, but also in the world, in the near future? Would that happen?
I think the expectation is economically that China will catch up and probably surpass the US in terms of the size of its economy. In that could even take place in the next few years, though China's facing a rather difficult time. It's already the second largest economy. There are various projections, but certainly in the 2020s, it would be expected, all other things being equal, that even if China takes a bit of an economic hit at certain points, if it can keep its growth rates even on a reasonable trajectory, it would be expected to pass the United States. Of course, it's a large country, 1.3 billion people, already a very large economy. There's no intrinsic reason why it shouldn't be able to maintain a certain level of growth, even if it's not at the double-digit levels that it was. How that translates in terms of military presence, for instance, and the capacity for China to operate with the same facility as the United States across the world, that's going to take a much longer period of time. And it's not necessarily clear that China wants to have the kind of global military presence that the United States has. It is expanding already some of the facilities and presence, that parts of the world that it's operating in, but this is still tentative. This still, if you were to compare it even to some large European countries, for instance, it's still on a relatively modest scale. The major Chinese military build-up is really taking place on the East Asian side, and is directed more at the region. It's a much more modest global presence. how China's economic influence translates politically in various regions of the world, that's going to be, of course, the big question as well. There are areas where it already is translating its economic presence into political influence, but there's areas where it's still more cautious. The Middle East, for instance, it's very careful not to involve itself in the politics there. So there's still parts of the world where I don't think it's clear that China wants to be a comparable kind of superpower, but ultimately China wants to be number one. There's no question about that.
Good. One last question about Iran. Do you see any role in this, the whole crisis, any Chinese role or any ambitions that they would try to get something out of this crisis? What's going on between the United States and Iran and the rest of the international community?
Well, China's always been somewhat split in two minds even about these nuclear negotiations. On the one hand, if there's a deal reached between the West and Iran, it means that the lifting of sanctions will enable China to again go back to expanding its energy imports from Iran, and there are a lot of economic projects in Iran that China would like to pursue there. At the same time, Iran has been one of the closest countries to China in the Middle East, and there's still some fears from some on the Chinese side that a deepening relationship between Iran and the West might ultimately be at the expense of having that close partner in the region. The balance at the moment tends to be in favour of the economic side. Iran is going to play an important potential role in this Silk Road corridor that China's building. Iran is one of the key transit areas for China to build out its energy and road and rail connection points running all the way through to Europe in the end even. So in that sense, and for the energy reasons, I think China's quite keen to see sanctions lifted, but strategically it still has some reservations.
Very good. Andrew Small, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We can shake hands. I really appreciate your time. Great discussion indeed. And this was our guest today for Cafe DC. He's a senior transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thank you very much for watching another episode of Cafe DC.